Cause I really look cute though. Like I really am hurt though. Like you really quit playing with me though. Cause what's up?
Late night shooting in a shopping center parking lot. A woman is killed and days later the shooter is still on the run. The family of the mother killed last week in the Pocket neighborhood is pleading with whoever is responsible to turn themselves in.
Yeah, her family says the victim is a 26-year-old loving mother of 2 young children. ABC 10's Roxanne Elias has their emotional plea for help.
On the night of Valentine's Day, February 14, 2024, 26-year-old Chasity Sparkman was found shot in a shopping center parking lot at Florin Road and Greenhaven Drive in Sacramento, California, and later died of her injuries at a local hospital. Sparkman, a mother of 2 and student at Sacramento City College, had an earlier altercation with her estranged husband, whom family identified as Isaiah James, along with his girlfriend, Ayada Burgos, both later arrested in New York City and facing extradition to Sacramento on homicide-related charges. Police confirmed they are investigating charges related to the shooting, but had not released definitive motive details at the time of arrest. The circumstances leading to Sparkman's return to her husband after a domestic dispute and her subsequent death raise complex questions about the relational, psychological, and situational dynamics that may have driven the violence.
A slew of emotions hit as this Sacramento family tries to understand how their sister, 26-year-old Chasity Sparkman, was killed on Valentine's Day.
It's especially hard for her kids. My auntie has to sit here and, deal with the mood swings, and she's trying to cope herself, so we're not okay. We're trying to be, but we're not okay.
The shooting happened around 11:30 p.m. Wednesday in the Lake Crest Village shopping center in the Pocket neighborhood. Sparkman's family says from what they know, Chasity was there meeting with her husband when things turned violent.
Here, we deliver clear, factual, and up-to-date true crime stories. Subscribe and turn on notifications to stay informed on the latest cases and investigations. The crime itself presented immediate investigative priorities: timeline reconstruction, digital communication analysis, surveillance footage review, and ballistic examination. Detectives examined the period between the reported earlier altercation and the final meeting. Phone records, text messages, and location data became central to establishing intent and coordination. The setting, a public parking lot, suggested either a planned confrontation in a neutral location or a meeting arranged to avoid witnesses at private residences. Investigators analyzed whether the site was chosen deliberately for accessibility, anonymity, or surveillance blind spots. Immediate suspicions focused on relational proximity. In intimate partner homicide cases, statistical patterns often direct early scrutiny toward current or former partners. The reported physical altercation earlier that evening elevated concern about escalating violence. Investigators likely assessed whether the second meeting was voluntary reconciliation, coercion, or a pretext. The presence of a third party, James's girlfriend, added complexity. Law enforcement examined communication between James and Burgos before and after the shooting to determine whether planning or coordination occurred. Relationship dynamics formed the next layer of inquiry. Sparkman and James were estranged, indicating separation or active marital strain. Separation is a documented risk factor in domestic violence escalation. Detectives would evaluate whether the relationship ended recently, whether custody disputes were ongoing, and whether either party had expressed jealousy or resentment. The introduction of a new romantic partner often intensifies conflict, particularly if unresolved legal or financial ties remain between spouses. Investigators would analyze whether tensions between Sparkman and Burgos existed directly or indirectly through James. Financial pressure is a recurring motive category in domestic homicides. Detectives typically examine joint bank accounts, shared debts, child support obligations, and employment instability. If separation was underway, questions arise about division of assets, financial independence, or dependency. Investigators would request banking records, review transaction histories, and assess whether unusual withdrawals or transfers occurred before or after the crime. They would also evaluate whether financial strain could have contributed to escalating arguments earlier that evening. However, absent publicly released financial findings, motive theories in this category remain speculative, pending court disclosure. Psychological evaluation adds another dimension. In criminal proceedings, behavioral experts may assess impulsivity, aggression history, possessiveness, or control patterns. Investigators would review prior incident reports, restraining orders, or documented threats. They would examine whether the earlier physical altercation represented an isolated event or part of a sustained pattern. For Sparkman, agreeing to meet after reported violence raises investigative questions about coercion, reconciliation attempts, or manipulation. For suspects, flight to another state may be interpreted by prosecutors as consciousness of guilt, though defense counsel may frame relocation as unrelated or coincidental. Prior incidents are critical in establishing escalation. Law enforcement would search databases for previous calls for service at shared addresses, domestic disturbance complaints, or protective order filings. Witness interviews with relatives, friends, or neighbors could reveal patterns of conflict not formally reported. In court, prosecutors often use documented prior abuse to establish motive rooted in control or retaliation. If prior incidents were absent from official records, the case narrative may rely heavily on digital evidence and eyewitness testimony. Insurance policies or legal disputes often surface in homicide investigations involving spouses. Detectives would determine whether life insurance policies existed and who the beneficiaries were. They would review pending divorce filings, custody hearings, or protective order petitions. Motive theory in such cases sometimes centers on financial gain, avoidance of support payments, or leverage in custody matters. At the time of public reporting, authorities had not announced findings indicating insurance fraud or financial incentive, leaving this category as a standard investigative checkpoint rather than a confirmed driver. Escalation patterns require precise chronology. Investigators map the progression from verbal dispute to physical assault, from assault to arranged meeting, and from meeting to fatal violence. They assess whether the meeting was requested urgently, whether threats were issued, and whether weapons were obtained beforehand. If surveillance or digital evidence shows planning activity, such as coordinated travel routes or communications indicating intent, that supports a premeditation theory. If events unfolded rapidly following a heated argument, defense counsel may argue spontaneous escalation rather than calculated intent. The investigative turning point appears linked to the identification and location of suspects outside California. Tracking movements across state lines often involves collaboration between local police, federal agencies, and interstate communication systems. Digital footprints, cell phone pings, license plate readers, and financial transactions can establish travel patterns. The apprehension of both James and Burgos in New York City suggests investigators developed sufficient probable cause to secure arrest warrants. Extradition proceedings typically follow confirmation of identity and formal charging. The arrest stage shifts focus from investigation to prosecution. Prosecutors must present evidence establishing probable cause for homicide charges and, if applicable, enhancements such as conspiracy or premeditation. Defense attorneys evaluate whether evidence directly links each defendant to the shooting. The prosecution's narrative may argue coordinated action rooted in jealousy, retaliation, or control. The defense may challenge intent, presence on the scene, or the reliability of witness accounts. In court, interpretation of motive becomes strategic rather than purely investigative. Prosecutors frame motive to provide jurors with a logical explanation for the crime, even though motive is not always legally required for conviction if intent and action are proven. If evidence supports planning, the state may argue deliberate action motivated by relational conflict. If financial records reveal strain, prosecutors may integrate economic stress into their theory. The defense may argue absence of clear motive undermines the prosecution's case or introduces reasonable doubt. Remaining questions persist pending full court proceedings and evidentiary disclosure. What communications occurred between the initial altercation and the final meeting? Was the meeting voluntary or compelled? What role, if any, did Burgos play in planning or execution? Were there prior documented threats or restraining orders? Did financial disputes intensify tensions? Until trial evidence is publicly presented, these questions frame the ongoing examination of motive. The case illustrates how investigators dissect intimate partner homicides, beginning with the act itself, expanding into relational history, financial documentation, behavioral assessment, and escalation mapping. While arrests have been made, definitive conclusions about motive rest with the court's evaluation of evidence presented under oath. Thanks for watching. Did you find this case informative? If you want more true crime stories, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to stay informed on the latest cases and investigations.